Good morning, conference. I'm here today to talk about energy policy. And if any of you has had an electricity bill thump heavily onto your doormat recently, you will know why it's an important issue. The UK is currently well in the top half of energy prices in the EU. And the EU itself is way more expensive than the United States of America with its cheap shale gas, and more expensive than China and India, who depend largely on cheap coal. That's why some companies are moving out of the UK and out of the EU altogether. Alcan closed its smelting plant in the northeast in March 2012. Aluminium smelting is an energy-intensive business, and energy-intensive industries are moving out. Companies in the chemicals industry are looking to invest outside Europe, concerned about energy prices, but also concerned about the price and availability of gas as a feedstock. Even the European Commission seems to have noticed at long last. Last week, Energy Commissioner Günther Oettinger said that Europe can't continue to pursue a unilateral climate policy if it's going to undermine our competitiveness. And the next day, in what looks very like a concerted move, Industry Commissioner Antonio Tajani used language that was even more apocalyptic. He said that Europe faces an industrial massacre from energy prices. My only question for the Commission is, what took you so long? UKIP has been warning about energy policy and energy prices and competitiveness for years. And yet, once again, ladies and gentlemen, a UKIP policy position has been vindicated by events. We're driving energy-intensive businesses offshore, taking their jobs and their investment with them. But it's not just industry. We're driving households and pensioners into fuel poverty. These increases are partly driven by global fuel prices, but increasingly today, in the UK, they're driven by the government's obsessive reliance on renewables. And it will get much worse if we continue to pursue the ridiculous Brussels objective of 20% renewables by 2020. So what is UKIP's position? We have two key objectives, and they're both very simple. First of all, we want to keep the lights on. Remember that Ofgem itself has said that we're at real risk of power outages in the next 2 or 3 years on current policies. And our second objective is affordable energy. We need affordable energy so that families and pensioners can keep warm in the winter. We need affordable energy so that our industry stays competitive and our children and our grandchildren have jobs. So how will we achieve these objectives? By relying on proven, grown-up generating technologies like coal and oil and gas and nuclear. That's in contrast to this government's relying on playground technologies like wind and solar. Technologies that deliver an unreliable trickle of very expensive power. Today I want to talk especially about gas. But first, a few words about coal. Nowadays, we have better and cleaner methods of extracting and burning coal, and it remains a vital part of our energy mix. But there's no doubt that in the past, coal created very serious health and environmental problems. Now, there were no green campaigners around in the late 18th century. Maybe they had something better to do. But if there had been, they'd have had a strong case against coal. It required thousands of men to spend their working lives a mile underground in the dust and the dark and in constant danger of death. It's estimated that over 250,000 miners have died in the industry since its inception. At one stage, it's estimated that 10,000 miners a year were dying in Chinese coal mines alone. We've had a whole series of health problems created by coal, and especially miners contracting pneumoconiosis and other respiratory diseases, pit ponies blinded by coal dust. Mines covered large parts of the country with spoil tips and slag heaps and massive pit head gear. The land was ravaged by open-cast mining, though these days, of course, we're much better at reinstating old open-cast pits. And most people seem to have forgotten that, in fact, mining also causes earth tremors and seismic activity. Coal also led to massive air pollution. This is not ancient history. The last great London smog was 1952. Many of us in this hall today were alive in 1952. The terrible mining-related accident of Aberfan, in which 144 people, including 114 children, very sadly died, was as recent as 1966. So if Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, had been around in the boom days of coal mining, she'd have had a strong case to argue. Now, imagine that we could come up with a new energy technology that offered all the economic benefits of coal mining, the wealth creation, the jobs, the prosperity, the energy security, but without asking men to spend their working lives in the dust and the dark and the danger, without debilitating lung diseases. Imagine we had a new technology that was hugely safer, that offered cleaner air, less visual intrusion, less seismic impact. And of course, we have such a technology. It's called shale gas. You might imagine that the Greens would be weeping tears of gratitude and opening the champagne bottles. But not a bit of it. Caroline Lucas, their MP, went off to sit in the protest line at Balcombe, which is bizarre, seeing nobody was proposing fracking at Balcombe anyway. There are other sites in the UK where fracking is actually going on, but she didn't go there. There are other sites in Sussex where there are regular oil wells, like the one that is proposed for Balcombe, but Caroline wasn't there either. Her demonstration was about publicity, not about saving the world. I want to say a word about Balcombe. I don't know if we have anybody in the audience who comes from that neck of the woods. I have great respect for the local residents who are understandably concerned. They've all seen the black propaganda about shale gas, and they're entitled to ask questions about it. Given that fracking has been going on for 50 years, how come we suddenly have all this negative publicity? There are two sets of interest groups behind it. First of all, there are the green NGOs. They need scare stories to keep the donations and the legacies coming. And they hate prosperity and progress and industry and free markets. They especially hate shale gas because it blows away their narrative that fossil fuels are running out and that we have to rely on windmills instead. I sometimes think that Caroline Lucas wouldn't be happy until every family in England was obliged to subsist on 1 acre and a cow. Although, of course, the Greens won't let us have cows because cows burp methane, and methane is a greenhouse gas. But then there are the foreign oil and gas exporters, like Gazprom. The Russians and the Middle East want us to keep buying their expensive imported gas. They don't want us to rely on our own domestic supplies. It's widely reported that some of these people have been funding the black propaganda, like the Gasland movie. So I understand and sympathize with local residents in Balcombe. It's the job of responsible politicians and of the industry to reassure them. But I have absolutely no sympathy for the rent-a-mob protesters, the swampies and the Occupy movement and the anti-capitalists and the eco-freaks who have sought to hijack the Balcombe protest. I have no time for Vivienne Westwood and Bianca Jagger and Caroline Lucas, who subvert residents' proper concerns for their own political ends. I have no time even for the beautiful journalist, Eva Jasowitz, who is frontwoman for the campaign group No Dash for Gas. In her television interviews, she trots out the usual trite and discredited global warming arguments against shale gas. But in her Guardian blog, she gives the game away. Here's what she said. Changing our sources of energy without changing our sources of economic and political power will not make a difference. Neither coal nor nuclear is the solution. We need a revolution. So there you have it. It's not about fracking. It's not about global warming. It's not about saving the planet. It's about a socialist revolution. She's trying to use Balcombe residents as pawns in her game. So let's turn for a moment to those concerns about shale gas. And let me recommend a brilliant essay by Matt Ridley, the author of The Rational Optimist. He's written an essay called The 5 Myths About Fracking, and it covers all the main worries that people have. If you have any interest in this subject at all, please do go and Google it and read it. It's well worth it. First of all, the myth that fracking pollutes water. Ridley quotes a series of studies by the US Environmental Protection Agency and by university academics who conclude that there are simply no proven cases of water pollution and, quote, pollution of aquifers by fracking is not physically plausible. Given that fracking usually occurs about 10 times deeper than the water table, that shouldn't be too surprising. The movie Gasland shows scary pictures of bathroom taps lighting up with gas in the water. This is not only extremely rare, it's also not caused by fracking. It results from the decay of organic material close to the surface, like the marsh gas that you find in wetlands. The director of the Gasland movie knew that perfectly well, but he still chose to blame fracking. There have been over 10,000 wells drilled and over 2 million fracking operations, and not a single proven case of groundwater contamination. Our media have been irresponsibly carrying stories about earthquakes caused by fracking. Here again, the truth is different. Fracking may cause very small tremors, mostly so small you need specialist equipment to detect them. But bear in mind, these are on a smaller scale than the tremors which are known to be caused by both coal mining and also hydro. We're told that fracking can release gas into the atmosphere. But Ridley quotes studies showing that fracking does not release any more methane into the atmosphere than conventional gas operations. A recent report by David Mackay, who is the chief scientist of the Department for the Environment and Climate Change, no less, likewise concludes that, quote, the carbon footprint of shale gas extraction and use is likely to be comparable to gas extracted from conventional sources and lower than the carbon footprint of imported liquefied natural gas. The Guardian has claimed that fracking uses so much water that America is running out. In fact, the truth is that the use of water for fracking in the USA represents only 0.3% of all water used. And that, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is actually less than the Americans use to water their golf courses. The BBC recently released a report saying that fracking releases hundreds of dangerous chemicals into the rocks. But in fact, in the US, fracking uses around a dozen chemicals, and they are all common chemicals that you would find around the house in toiletries and cleaning products. In the UK, Cordrilla, for example, has used just one non-hazardous chemical additive in its fracking in Lancashire. The two biggest elements in fracking fluid are water and sand. Finally, Ridley compares shale gas with wind turbines, which kill millions of birds and thousands of bats every year. It's a strange irony that the RSPB has questioned the use of fracking, which has never killed a bird ever, and instead supports wind farms which kill birds on an industrial scale. It's doubly ironic, in fact, as the RSPB seems wholly unaware that an established fracking site in the UK at Beckingham in Nottinghamshire is close by an RSPB reserve, and there have never been any environmental problems there. Indeed, it seems that local residents and the RSPB are blissfully unaware that there's a fracking site there at all. Some people are concerned about the visual intrusion and landscape impact of shale gas. They need not be. An exploratory drilling well will be in place for no more than a few months. When the well is drilled, the remaining wellhead installation is roughly the size of a garden shed. That's a small price to pay for the economic benefits which gas offers. They are dramatically less intrusive than wind turbines, and I ought to know, ladies and gentlemen, because I have 4 very large wind turbines within a mile of my home. Now, I couldn't resist showing you this cartoon which contrasts generating energy from wind turbines with generating energy from shale gas. In the top picture, well, you can see the wind turbines, can't you? You can also see the gas or diesel power station, which of course you need to provide backup power when the wind doesn't blow. The wind industry doesn't like to tell us too much about that. If you look very carefully at the top picture, you will of course also see the dead birds under the wind turbine. Compare that to what a shale well looks like in the second picture. Only you can't see what the shale well looks like because that little shed-size installation, of course, is well hidden by trees, and the birds are still flying in the air, which seems to me like rather a good thing. Given that choice, I think it's a no-brainer. Now, people in UKIP sometimes ask me, they say, if we're against wind farms, then surely we must be against shale gas too. I'm always very happy when they ask that question because it gives me the opportunity to answer it. Wind farms are a non-solution to a non-problem. They produce an intermittent trickle of very expensive electricity. They are sheer waste of money. They are pure gesture politics. Gas, on the other hand, is a vital part of our energy mix. Some people tell me there may not be too much gas out there anyway, but the British Geological Survey thinks we have enough for decades, may have more indeed than the USA has. Or people tell me that it may not be economic to extract it. Well, of course that's possible, but it's extremely unlikely, and we won't know till we get on and do a bit more exploratory drilling, and we need to get on with it. It would be desperately irresponsible not to find out. Imagine that in the 18th century we'd said we won't bother with coal. Or imagine in the 70s we said we won't bother with North Sea oil. Of course we've got to go out and find out what the opportunity is. Other people tell me, even if we've got gas there, prices won't come down. But prices certainly came down massively in America, and British gas has real worth and value for Britain. I'd like to come back to that point in a moment. Of course I'd like to see lower prices. But if the benefit went to the Treasury in tax, or if it saves us spending billions of pounds abroad on imported gas, Britain and the British economy and the British people will still benefit. So, what are all these economic benefits I keep talking about? First, jobs and investment in the gas industry. The Institute of Directors estimates that something like 74,000 jobs could be created by this industry. And what's more, they are real jobs delivering real value. They're not ephemeral green jobs that do damage elsewhere in the economy. Secondly, enhanced competitiveness for British industry as a whole, leading to yet more jobs and more investment. America is seeing an industrial renaissance based on low-price shale gas. Jobs that were offshored to Asia are coming home to America. We can expect similar benefits in the UK. Then energy security. Currently, we are increasingly dependent on foreign suppliers, often from politically unstable areas like Russia and the Middle East. It will be hugely valuable to have our own supplies. Then, more Treasury revenues, and heaven knows we need them. And finally, lower emissions and cleaner air. In the EU, they are trying to tackle CO2 emissions with over-regulation. But in America, shale gas is actually achieving reduction in emissions, and Caroline Lucas ought to be ashamed that she is not embracing the technology. We in UKIP have a vision for energy in our country. We want to keep the lights on. We want energy to be affordable, and in an uncertain world, we want energy supplies to be secure. We want fuel poverty to be a thing of the past. We want British industry to be competitive, bringing employment and investment and growth and prosperity. We want economic regeneration. We want our children and our grandchildren to have jobs. Gas is essential if we're going to deliver that vision. Earlier on, I compared shale gas to North Sea oil, and I believe it's at least as great an opportunity for Britain. We in Britain took the proceeds of North Sea oil and spent them on current expenditure. The Norwegians, on the other hand, took a different approach. They're smart people, those Norwegians. They were the ones, you remember, who decided not to join the European Union. They also decided not to blow that North Sea oil wealth straight away. They chose to remain a sovereign nation, but they also chose to establish a sovereign wealth fund. That Norwegian sovereign wealth fund is currently worth $750 billion, not millions, $750 billion, and that's about 1.5 times Norway's gross domestic product. Today, UKIP is calling for the creation of a British sovereign wealth fund based on shale gas. We think that's good economics, but I tell you what, it is also the best way of reassuring the British people that the money from shale gas will not just go to bankers and oil barons and utility companies and the taxman. It will go to the British people for their benefit and for future generations. That is the vision we have for energy. That is what we intend to deliver. Thank you very much indeed.